Colorado is taking a closer look at nursing homes, trying to slow down the pandemic. For the first time, we can show you what they're finding. Denver prepares to reopen and mask up. If prior citations are a predictor of future results, the city mainly plans on asking nicely. Education funding. It's where state spending meets family budgets. We have an in-depth look at the hard decisions ahead. If there's a gravestone found in your neighborhood, who are you going to call? Steve Steger. And would you trust your neighbors to pick out the color of your house? 50 Shades of Beige is not as sexy as the original, but it's next. Colorado's senior care centers are expected to be the battleground against COVID-19 in the coming months. Some of those facilities have dozens of reported coronavirus cases. Others, not a single one. The state says it's going to take months to do increased inspection of every single one of those places, though health officials are sharing what they have found so far with our Mark Salinger.
Getting a look inside 1,081 nursing homes, assisted living facilities, and senior care centers across the state takes time. Time that CDPHE is racing against to save lives. The department was tasked by Governor Polis to increase inspections. The goal is to now survey at least 55 facilities a week, a 50% increase over non-COVID times. They've completed 281 surveys since March 22nd, around a quarter of all facilities in the state. It'll take months to visit all of them.
We will send one or two of our surveyors in full PPE.
Randy Kuykendall is the Director of Health Facilities and Emergency Medical Services for CDPHE. He wasn't available to speak with us today, but we asked him last week about what inspectors found.
We have found some facilities that are not as compliant as they should have been.
CDPHE have issued at least 137 citations since March 22nd. Some were related to infection control, others were not. It's not clear how many different facilities were issued citations and what the problems were.
All of it hinges on your ability to have adequate personal protective equipment in place to be able to follow those guidelines.
Doug Farmer is the president of the Colorado Healthcare Association, advocating for long-term care facilities and their staff across the state. He points to a lack of PPE and testing as a barrier between knowing who is infected and who is not.
We don't know exactly how many have COVID, obviously, and are asymptomatic.
CDPHE now keeps track of how many facilities have sufficient PPE. Of the 63 surveyed, 8 were labeled as being in crisis with an immediate need for supplies.
And we don't know which specific facilities are in need of PPE, or we don't know the names of those facilities that have been cited so far. Now, at last count, there have been 342 deaths of people who tested positive for COVID-19 inside these senior care facilities. Kyle?
Mark, considering how long it's going to take to inspect every place, how do they decide where they go first?
Well, the State Department of Health started at the beginning by going and inspecting the locations that had had a citation, an infection control citation, sometime in the past 3 years. And then once they completed those, they went on to the facilities with larger outbreaks and other inspections that they needed to conduct.
Makes sense. All right. Mark Salinger reporting. Good to have you on the program, Mark. We continue to see an encouraging downward trend in COVID-19 hospitalizations in Colorado. 650 Coloradans are in the hospital for it right now. 93 patients have been discharged or transferred within the last day. Colorado's daily testing rate continues to fluctuate. We told you that rate was dropping a bit as we went into May, but then it came up significantly to start this week. Look at those day-over-day numbers. A reminder, the state revised down the governor's original goal of 10,000 tests a day and is now hoping for 8,500 by the end of May. Hair salons and barber shops in Denver can reopen on Saturday, which is tremendous news for anyone who is not completely satisfied with his wife's work with the dog clippers. Denver's reopening also applies to retail stores, but not to restaurants, bars, gyms, music venues. In fact, there's not even a reopening date for those. Tomorrow starts Denver's public mask ordinance for those places that are reopening. No mask required when you're just out and around getting fresh air, but they want you to wear one when you're inside someplace. It's pretty clear that Denver Mayor Michael Hancock wants no part of actually enforcing a mask ban, or a mask order. He'd rather just ask nicely.
This is about those of us who care enough about humanity and about each other to comply. And it's pretty easy to comply with a shirt, with a bandana, something that covers your nose, covers your mouth, to help show it's a symbolic gesture to your neighbor that you care enough about them to wear a mask. And that's what we're asking everyone to do.
Denver City Attorney did say today that they would be more apt to perhaps cite a business that was not doing the bare minimum to tell people that they needed to be wearing masks inside. The head of Denver's health department said today that what the city's going to be watching for as a trouble sign is a 5-day spike in cases. If that happens, they'll be looking back about 2 weeks to figure out what exactly went wrong at that time and perhaps bring back tougher rules. Hey, speaking of tougher rules, this, of course, is Cinco de Mayo, so that means cruising on Federal. And, of course, Denver police put out their annual warning that if traffic gets to be a safety issue, they'll go in there and break up the long strings of cars. But just imagine Denver police going in to break up cruising on Federal for Cinco de Mayo at the exact same time that drive-through parade events like birthday parties and graduations are actually being encouraged. Yeah, I don't see it happening either. Happy Cinco de Mayo. May I make a recommendation? Point you towards something that did not come from us, but I think is definitely worth your time. It is a podcast recommendation, a short podcast about the long history in America of people opposing public mask orders. The 1918 flu pandemic also led to those mask orders, as well as a small vocal minority of people refusing to wear masks. They called themselves the Anti-Mask League, which sounds really cool. I'm going to suggest that to the angry guys on Twitter. Anyway, the podcast. It's embedded from NPR, and it's a look specifically at the Anti-Mask League in San Francisco a century ago. And they cover what happened when everyone decided to take their masks off. What do you think happened? Oh, you're going to have to listen to the podcast. There's a link on the next Facebook page. This is an important week as state legislators begin to look at school funding for next August. Colleges use state funding to keep tuition from going higher. Though our Marshall Zellinger found, even without extra state funding, tuition is unlikely to rise next year. And Marshall also found one thing that your family can do this summer to get help with money for college.
Colleges and universities are the ones getting a crash course right now in how to fund your education when everyone's funds are limited.
We're mindful that the price that people pay affects their ability to attend.
Henry Sobenet knows how to juggle money. He was the state's budget director for Governors Bill Owens and John Hickenlooper. He's now the chief financial officer for Colorado State University.
What's making this harder for people to understand is that there's other revenue that we are losing, just like other businesses in Colorado. The biggest chunk is housing and dining.
Millions in lost revenue at big schools. And on top of that, later this month, lawmakers will decide how much CSU and other colleges will actually get from the state, with the state having to cut its own budget, which leads to the question of how much tuition might go up to make up for all that lost money. The state capped tuition increases to an average of 3%, but with the state funding in question, now what? This chart provided to the Joint Budget Committee shows how much tuition would have to go up to make up for fewer state dollars. For instance, if the state cut funding 20%, CSU would need to raise tuition 35% to make up the difference. Spoiler alert, CSU won't do that.
It would be unaffordable. And no school in Colorado is asking for permission to raise tuition by that amount. It's a way just to show the magnitude of the problem.
The big thing for us is enrollment, and what will our enrollment look like in the fall? And we won't know that now yet for several weeks.
CU is preparing for 3 scenarios. Best case, students in person in the fall. In between, online in the fall, in person in the spring. Worst case, online all year. Regardless, CU Regents are going to get a proposal next month for a 0% tuition increase.
We don't see tuition increases on the horizon for us. We recognize that some of our colleague institutions need flexibility, but we're also concerned about people's financial situations out there.
What's most important is that we do not transfer this burden onto students and their families.
Dr. Angie Piccioni is the executive director of Colorado's Department of Higher Ed. She has an assignment for students waiting to go back to college. Fill out federal student aid. Whether you get it or not depends on your family's financial situation. Piccioni estimates that students in Colorado miss out on $48 million worth of that money by not even trying.
The maximum federal financial aid is about $6,200, $6,195. And so you might not qualify for all of it, but you could qualify for enough to pay for tuition at community college for sure.
As for how the schools are going to make up their money problems, both CU and CSU are hoping for federal help, but they're also studying their own budgets to see what they might need to cut. For Next, I'm Marshall Zellinger.
Some trippy things going on with the backgrounds there. You can find a link to the FAFSA application on our website. The key date to remember is next Tuesday. That is also when we're going to get an update on how much the state will have to budget for the next fiscal year, which begins on July 1st.
To the driver who hit me and ran, I was biking home when you barreled into me with your car and left me to die.
A man would like a word with the driver who hit and paralyzed him last summer, and with the rest of us who all share the road. Next.
Andrew Bernstein has a message for the driver who changed his life. "You left me to die," is what he wrote in an essay for Outdoor Magazine. The cyclist from Boulder has been paralyzed since he was hit by a van last summer on Arapahoe Road. He talked with our photojournalist Foster Gaines about that day and his long road since.
It was a Saturday like any other summer Saturday. It was a longer ride. I was on my way home. I was close to home, and I was hit by a van on Arapahoe Avenue, and I was left on the side of the road. The person driving left, and I had severe injuries, 30 broken bones, including several vertebrae in my back, internal bleeding in my pelvis area, 2 collapsed lungs, and a spinal cord injury. We are now more than 9 months after the crash occurred. To the driver who hit me and ran, I was biking home when you barreled into me with your car and left me to die. I had the opportunity to write an essay for Outside Magazine about what happened to me when the van hit me. I really thought it was an important opportunity to talk to drivers about the dangers posed by automobiles. You plowed into me from behind when I was riding on a nearly empty road. Your speed was so fast relative to mine that I was guaranteed severe injury despite my safety tokens. There's just a tremendous amount of people who drive too fast, who drive distracted, who don't obey laws like stop signs. Your van hit me with such violence that pieces of your vehicle and mine scattered along the grassy embankment. The impact flung my body through the air and I landed at the bottom of a roadside ditch. Really, I want to pass on this message of safety that we all need to be careful drivers. We all need to look out for each other, and we need to remember that while our cars are primarily modes of transportation, they're also very dangerous. They're not intended to be, but they are.
Colorado State Patrol told us today they did not have an update on the case. We reported last year that the van that investigators think was involved had been found. No driver had ever been charged. Greg Zanis died this week. He was not a Coloradan, but he did come here a few times, each time to bring hope to people who were hurting.
Greg Zanis first came into view for Coloradans, and for most Americans, in 1999. He'd come here all the way from Illinois, with 15 white crosses he'd made by hand, for each of the 13 victims of the Columbine school shooting, and 2 crosses for the shooters. The father of one of the 13 decided the last 2 would not stand. But those 13 crosses remained, as a reminder of Colorado's loss. Zanis made more than 25,000 crosses over the years. More than 20,000 stood in memory of the victims of mass shootings, as the years after Columbine proved that America had a problem it was unwilling or unable to solve. He made Stars of David for the synagogue shooting victims, crescents for Muslims killed in shootings, and he wrote each name in a notebook, then another, and another, and eventually he filled 75. Greg Zanis came to every corner of America, and in his last days with cancer, Americans stood outside his home in Illinois to mark their appreciation with their presence. In the field of memory, we plant a single white cross, for Greg Zanis, the man whose hands and heart helped Americans when they were hurting.
Coloradans with extra time on their hands have been digging up this and that in their backyards, mostly gardens, but on occasion headstones. So recently, you may remember our Steve Steger helped out a guy up in Firestone who had found a headstone belonging to a World War II vet. That was a discarded, flawed stone. The vet's family came forward to claim it. Now Steve is working on an older case for us. Sean Kenyon was digging a garden in the backyard of a home in Denver's Sunnyside neighborhood when they found this. It's a headstone for a Corporal P.J. Teberg, born 1836, died 1902. Sean did some research, discovered that Corporal Teberg was mustered to fight in the Civil War as part of the 43rd Illinois Infantry, fought for the Union. So he won. That's cool. Good to be on the winning side. Sean also found that Mr. Teberg is buried at Riverside Cemetery. Supposed to have a tombstone there. But you can just imagine what Sean and his brother were thinking when they dug that out of the yard.
You know, your mind starts going and millions
start thinking
places.
There used to be a graveyard in our yard, which, you know,
poltergeist type things, and you know, so it's a little bit of a cool and ominous at the same time.
That he was born in Sweden. He was 66 years old when he passed away. His wife returned to Sweden somewhere in the 1890s, and he had 3 or 4 kids. Depending, that's all through Ancestry.com and somebody who built the tree, but which they're masked behind a wall. We can't see who it is.
If you were watching Sean there and he made you thirsty and you couldn't figure out why, he owns a couple bars around town, Williams and Graham among them. So he posted about this gravestone find on Nextdoor and heard from the previous owner of the house, who said that he had found it in a pile of rock outside of Riverside Cemetery. He planned to use it in a garden, but eventually forgot, and it got buried in the yard. Sean's hope is that they are able to track down some family members and see if they are interested. Colorado, keep digging and call Steve Steger, who is not able to appear because of a video glitch tonight. It's a sign. The Coloradans are connecting in some unique ways these days. Melinda and Deb are enlisting their neighbors to help them pick out a shade of paint for their house, asking all of their neighbors in the Maple Ridge area in Littleton to vote on their color of choice. The swatches are right out there for comparison in front of the house. If you are curious, leading color there is green. That's very nice. That's very bold. I actually like it a lot. Your feedback is next. Hey teachers, if the whole National Appreciation Week dedicated to you was not proof enough, you should know Colorado appreciates you. Our nightly statewide shout out is for all the educators tonight. Samara wrote in reminding us that switching to remote learning is not an easy process. And then we got a text tip saying that they really appreciate all the teachers who are doing readings on YouTube to keep kids involved in literature. All right. Who else deserves applause coming from every corner of Colorado? Text me your suggestions to 303-871-1491, and we'll keep up our statewide shout-outs right here. Finish with your feedback. Linda says that was the nicest tribute to the man who made the crosses. I know a lot of people have seen those crosses in news coverage or in person over the years in Colorado and wanted you to know about Mr. Zanis' passing. Tammy Knutson says she just got her house painted and she reached out to her neighbors, just like that family did, to see what they thought about the house color. Said, well, they're going to see it more than I will. I actually think that's kind of sweet. Jay writes in to say, Kyle, more people love you than hate you, but it is 4-3. I'll take 4-3. And a very detailed note from Sean L. tonight. Kyle, would it be possible for you to mention that people pulling their face masks down to lick their fingers to get a better grip on produce is utterly disgusting? Goodness, people, get a hold of yourselves. See you next time.